This was shown on the Rachel Maddow show, and I'm making this one for all of you quote-unquote diamond and silk people that are constantly screaming about getting off of the quote-unquote Democratic plantation. Donald Trump and his dad are racist. His dad was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, okay? So, Donald followed in the footsteps of his father in his views on black people. This particular clip is going to show you specific examples of how Donald Trump discriminated against black people and continued to do so for at least 10 plus years. He fought the Department of Justice, who went after him not once, not twice, but 3 times, okay, in order to not just get him, because in the first Department of Justice lawsuit, he quote-unquote signed on to the consent agreement. 3 years later, they had to take him back into court because he was not complying with the consent agreement. And then about 6 years after that, they had to take him back into court again. So this covers that piece, okay? But there's an additional piece that you're going to see towards the end of the video, where Donald Trump's dad used the N-word in referring to black people and his opinion and policies as far as renting his properties to black people. And that's particularly egregious because he was getting federal funds and subsidies which required non-discrimination against black people. Here we go.
Okay, this is an exclusive story that you have not heard anywhere else, but it begins the first time that Donald Trump's name ever made it into the New York Times. So it was in 1973. He and his father were named in a racial discrimination lawsuit brought by the Federal Department of Justice against their real estate firm. That lawsuit by the Department of Justice claimed that the Trump management company systematically refused to rent to black people. African-American New Yorkers would apply for an advertised vacancy in the Trump building, and then they would just never hear anything back from their application, or they'd be told that the vacancy was listed in error and actually that unit wasn't really available. One crucial part of the investigation in that case was when equally qualified white New Yorkers would show up at the Trump company, and they would inquire about those same apartments. Magically, the suit alleged, the apartment would be back on the market and available for the white applicant, even though the black applicant had just been told that that apartment was gone. That DOJ lawsuit against the Trump real estate company, it was ultimately settled a couple of years later when the Trump organization signed onto a consent decree in which they promised that they would desegregate their properties, start renting to black people. That suit was one of a number of allegations and legal cases against the Trump organization for racial discrimination. And over the course of this presidential campaign, it has become a hot point of contention. Hillary Clinton raised it in the first presidential debate. Trump responded to her, bringing it up by saying that the consent agreement reflected no admission of wrongdoing. And then after he used that as the rebuttal, reporters at a lot of different publications and news outlets have looked into those allegations, to the way that suit was settled, to the other suits that were brought against the Trump real estate properties. Today alone, the Las Vegas Sun published an account from a woman who now lives in Nevada who says she was one of the white people who was sent in as a tester at Trump properties after a black applicant would allegedly be told that an apartment was not available. She'd show up as a white applicant with basically exactly the same qualifications, and she'd be offered the apartment. That story today in the Las Vegas Sun. A woman recounting her own experience in being involved in those lawsuits. Mother Jones also had another story tonight on additional discrimination lawsuits brought against the Trump organization, not in the 1970s, but in the 1980s. I can now tell you that NBC News has also been working on a report on the way the Trump management company allegedly discriminated against black people in rental housing. And in the course of the NBC investigation, they turned up what we've got exclusively tonight, a troubling eyewitness account from a man who worked as a rental agent at a Trump property. He says it was basically his job to do the discriminating. He says he was instructed directly to slow walk or outright reject potential tenants if they were black, because they were black. But listen to this. Listen to what he told NBC News when he was asked exactly how that instruction came to him and who was in the room while it happened.
Just take me back into that room. So you were sitting in the room and who was there? Describe the scene to me.
A black lady completed an application for an apartment in the building, a one-bedroom apartment, as I recall. And it was a very professionally written application. It was checked and verified. There were no liens, no judgments against her. And she was calling me on a daily basis wanting to know the status of her application. And one day, Mr. Trump and his son Donald came into the office, and I asked Ms. Fred Trump what I should do with this application because she's calling me constantly. And his response to me was, you know, I don't rent to the N-word. Put the application in the desk and forget about it.
So Fred Trump used the N-word, told you don't rent to people.
That is correct, yes.
And what was your response at that time?
Well, I was employed by them. I did what he said.
So this is the raw tape of an NBC producer in that diner, right, noisy diner, interviewing this rental agent who worked at a Trump property. And in the course of explaining basically how he says racial discrimination worked at the Trump organization back in the day when they were deciding who to rent to, he just mentions in recounting how this worked that young Donald Trump was standing there alongside his father when he says the father instructed this rental agent not to rent to anybody who was black. And he says when Donald Trump's father explained that his policy was not to rent to anybody who was black, what he actually used was the N-word to explain that policy, while Donald Trump stood right next to him. Obviously, given that Donald Trump is now running for president, that's a very inflammatory allegation. The producer goes back to the rental agent, again, to clarify that this is exactly what he's talking about. Do we mean you to say that Donald Trump, the man now running for president, was there when that happened and in fact when that language was used?
He said, put it in the drawer, forget about it. You know I do not rent to the N-word people. And that's what I did.
And Donald Trump was right there?
Donald Trump was right alongside his father when I was instructed to do that, yes.
Okay, so this is obviously a very explosive allegation about Donald Trump and his time working with his father at the Trump organization in the 1960s, when he would have been a very young man, also in the 1970s. Just to be 100%, 1,000% totally clear, though, the producer actually goes back to the rental agent again, asks him again, are you sure that Donald Trump was there, that he witnessed his father explain that this was his discriminatory policy, that he would not rent to black people, that he used the N-word when he explained that? Are you sure?
And when his father told you not to rent apartments to people of color, what was Donald's response?
And he shook his head. And that's the way it's supposed to be. Agreeing with his father.
Again, this is exclusive content. This has never been broadcast before. This is material obtained by NBC News just over the course of reporting out this story within the last few weeks. What this rental agent says is a very specific, very explosive allegation against Donald Trump personally in terms of what he allegedly witnessed and what he allegedly went along with and signaled his assent to as a very young man working in his father's organization. Now, the Trump campaign has responded to that specific allegation tonight. They gave us this response on the record. I'm going to give it to you in total. Quote, "That is total nonsense." That's their formal response from the campaign to these allegations. But I want to show you also, here is, so you understand where that reporting came from. Here is how NBC News is contextualizing this allegation. Here's how they are folding it into their overall story about discrimination by the Trump Organization at the very start of Donald Trump's real estate career.
It was 1963 in New York City, and Maxine Brown was looking for a place to live in Queens. She applied for an apartment owned by Donald Trump's father, Fred.
They asked me what kind of job that I had, and they were surprised that I was a nurse.
But Maxine says she wasn't welcome.
I was turned away because of my color.
Well, at the time, Donald was only 17. He was already involved in the company. Stanley Leibowitz was the rental agent who took Maxine's application.
Fred Trump came into my office with his son Donald at his side. I asked him what I should do with the application of Miss Brown. He told me at that time to take the application and put it in the desk drawer, as he does not rent to people of color, utilizing the N-word. And Donald shook his head, agreeing with his father.
By 1967, state investigators reportedly found that out of some 3,700 apartments in Trump Village, only 7 were occupied by African-American families. By 1973, Donald Trump was the president of Trump Management. Annette Gandy Ford was a teacher looking for a place to live. She went to a different Trump building, also in Queens.
I was black. I was not wanted. I don't think that it looked good in their estimation to have black people living in their facility.
She says there is no doubt in her mind that Donald Trump continued the practices of his father. The Department of Justice alleged a Trump employee was instructed to mark rental applications from African Americans with the letter C for colored.
The super said that there were no apartments, and that was not true.
She says she would never have spoken up if Donald Trump hadn't brushed off the company's bad behavior.
I think it's important that history not be erased.
Donald started his career back in 1973 being sued by the Justice Department for racial discrimination.
Annette was part of that lawsuit.
We, along with many, many other companies throughout the country, it was a federal lawsuit, were sued. We settled the suit with no admission of guilt. It was very easy to do.
Court records show it actually wasn't so easy to do. 3 years after the settlement, the Department of Justice went back to court saying Trump was not complying with the settlement agreement. 4 years after that, the Trump Organization was again taken to court in a class action lawsuit alleging a pattern of discrimination. Some 20 years after Maxine Brown was turned away. The Trump Organization and several other landlords settled the class action in 1984. Sheila Morse was one of the white testers who was sent into a Trump building a day after a black applicant was told no apartments were available.
When I got there, the superintendent greeted me with open arms. Oh, yes, come, I'll show you the apartment.
Morse was offered a 2-bedroom apartment. Annette Ford has kept all the documentation from her complaint all those years ago, though she says she hasn't looked at it in years.
It feels like the time has come to tell the story. When Donald Trump says that, they did not admit guilt, that may be true, but the fact that there was guilt there had to come out.
Here reporting by NBC News investigative reporter Cynthia McFadden. Now, the Trump campaign has made a formal response to NBC News on this story. Spokeswoman Hope Hicks says, quote, "There's absolutely no merit to the allegations. The suit was brought as part of a nationwide inquiry against a number of companies, and the matter was ultimately settled without any finding of liability and without any admission of wrongdoing whatsoever." That statement, of course, mirrors what Donald Trump said in the first presidential debate when Hillary Clinton brought up this same history. I should tell you, it's not true that this lawsuit was brought against a ton of companies nationwide. The first one in particular was specific to the Trump Organization, but they are sticking with that response anyway. Now, in response to the very specific allegation by Stanley Leibowitz, that rental agent who worked with the Trump Organization at the time, and who says explosively that Donald Trump stood alongside his father and nodded approvingly when his father used the N-word to explain who they do not rent to. In response to that specific allegation, the Trump campaign again tells us tonight that that is, quote, nonsense. They're not offering a substantive rebuttal against the allegation. They're just giving us that response. Nonsense.
That's because they don't have a rebuttal. Normally, Trump would have gone into a major tirade about this situation, but they know goddamn well that it's true. So all they can issue is that 4-word response. Okay? So now, for all of you people complaining about a lot of us, quote unquote, being on the Democratic plantation, I tell you what, you guys go stay on that Trump plantation, and when his ass loses, don't try to weasel your way back in, because you basically have taken sides. And the sides that you have taken are those of a racist. So you have decided to live in that particular racist house, live in it, and enjoy it. But don't come crawling back to us claiming that you made a mistake, because the evidence has been there. I've been putting it out for a long period of time. I actually did a video on Trump's discrimination a long time ago, okay? And the information you're seeing here, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Do your own research. In that lawsuit, there were multiple witnesses attesting to what the Trumps were doing. And Donald Trump was the head of that real estate company at the time. A lot of this was done. Yeah, it's true that it was his father's lead that he took, but he took the ball and ran with it. So go get back on that, or stay on that Trump plantation and enjoy yourselves. Idiots.